You've seen the images bomb schools, starving families, shattered homes. Over 58,000 Palestinians have reportedly died in Gaza since October 2023. Is it more than war? Is it genocide? Top human rights bodies are now making that accusation against Israel.
Welcome to GeoDecode. In this session, our mission is really to unpack what genocide actually means under international law.
Okay.
We'll analyze if the current situation in Gaza legally fits that definition and look into the global responses.
Right.
The goal here is clarity. We want to give you an informed understanding of these incredibly complex claims and counterclaims. We're drawing directly from sources like UN bodies, human rights organizations, legal groups, research articles.
And just to be clear, we're presenting the facts and perspectives from these sources. We're not endorsing any specific viewpoint ourselves.
Exactly. We're here to help you understand the core arguments being made.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we get into the specifics of Gaza, what exactly does genocide mean in the eyes of international law?
Well, the legal definition is very specific. It comes from the 1948 Genocide Convention.
Right, 1948.
Yeah. It defines genocide as acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Mm-hmm. That intent part is absolutely crucial.
And what kind of acts are we talking about?
The convention details specific acts, things like killing members of the group, obviously, causing serious bodily or mental harm, or, and this is key too, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part.
Conditions of life? Like starvation or...
Exactly. Preventing access to food, water, medicine, shelter. Things essential for survival. It's also important to remember, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, and the International Criminal Court, the ICC, they both have jurisdiction over these kinds of crimes. So this isn't just, rhetoric. It's serious international legal scrutiny.
That definition, especially the intent to destroy part, seems incredibly specific, particularly when you think about the chaos of conflict. What makes proving that element, the intent, so challenging in international law?
That's a really vital question. And you're right. Proving specific intent is often the highest hurdle in genocide cases.
Because it's about what's in someone's mind.
Precisely. It's not enough just to show that, horrific things happened or a group suffered terribly. You have to demonstrate a specific state of mind that the perpetrator intended the group's destruction.
And how do courts usually determine that? Direct orders saying commit genocide must be rare.
Extremely rare. So courts often look at a wider pattern of conduct.
Okay.
Things like public statements or inflammatory rhetoric from leadership, the systemic nature of the violence. Is it widespread? Is it organized?
I see.
They also look at the specific targeting. Are they targeting infrastructure essential for the group's survival? Hospitals, water sources, and crucially, things like the denial of humanitarian aid.
So it's about building a case from the circumstances.
Exactly. It's about building a compelling circumstantial case that points towards that specific destructive intent, even if you don't have, a direct confession or order.
Okay, with that legal framework established, let's now examine what the sources reveal about the situation currently unfolding in Gaza. Here's where it gets really interesting. What are the specific allegations being made?
Well, the sources we looked at present several key allegations, and they offer evidence to support them. First, there's the sheer scale of mass casualties and infrastructure destruction.
The numbers we hear are staggering.
They are. Reports cite upwards of 58,000, maybe even 60,000 Palestinian deaths since October 2023. And a huge number of those, tens of thousands, are children.
Yeah.
And beyond the deaths, there's just widespread destruction of infrastructure. Homes, hospitals, schools, universities. Much of Gaza is in ruins.
Okay, so casualties and destruction. What else?
Second, there are claims of what some sources call engineered deprivation.
Engineered deprivation.
Yes. This refers to the escalated blockade, cutting off or severely restricting essential supplies. Food, water, fuel, medical aid.
And who's making these claims?
Major NGOs like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. They state that these restrictions are creating purposefully life-threatening conditions.
Purposefully life-threatening. That sounds like it connects back to the definition.
It potentially could, yes. That's part of the argument being made. And finally, there are specific reports about the bombing of civilian sites.
Places people thought were safe.
Exactly. Sources give examples like a hospital being struck, various UN shelters housing displaced people, and notably the Holy Family Church, where civilians seeking refuge were killed.
So we have the legal definition. We have this grim picture from the sources. But the legal definition hinges on intent to destroy. What do the human rights groups, the UN experts, the states bringing these claims, what do they say specifically about intent?
Right, that's the crux of the legal argument. They focus on pulling together different strands of evidence to argue intent exists. For instance, Amnesty International, in a report from December 2024, concluded there is evidence of intent. They base this on the combination of factors: the scale of killings, the mass infrastructure destruction, the rhetoric used by some Israeli officials, which has been described as dehumanizing, and the ongoing blockade imposing those harsh conditions.
And Human Rights Watch.
The Human Rights Watch specifically highlighted the deprivation of water, stating that could constitute an act of genocide.
And what about at the state or UN level?
Well, there you have figures like the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese. She's been very vocal.
Yes, I've seen her reports.
And then, significantly, South Africa brought a formal case against Israel at the International Court of Justice back in January 2024.
Right, the ICJ case. That was huge news.
It was. And following that, the ICJ issued what are called provisional measures. It wasn't a final ruling on genocide, but it was effectively a warning.
What did it say?
It ordered Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent acts that could fall under the Genocide Convention, like killing Palestinians or causing serious harm, and crucially, to enable the provision of basic services and humanitarian assistance.
So, a warning and an order for aid access?
Essentially, yes. Prevent potential genocidal acts and let aid in. And beyond that, you have various legal scholars and groups from universities, places like Boston University, Cornell, Pretoria, Yale, who've analyzed the situation and argued that Israeli actions since October 7th do meet the legal criteria for genocide under the convention.
Okay, that's a significant body of argument pointing towards intent. But every story has multiple sides, and it's absolutely crucial we understand Israel's position here. What is their defense against these extremely serious allegations?
Israel's position, as stated consistently, is primarily one of self-defense.
Stemming from the October 7th attacks.
Exactly. They state their military operations are targeted specifically at Hamas, which they designate a terrorist organization, and not aimed at the Palestinian people as a whole.
And the civilian casualties, how do they explain those?
Their argument is that the tragic civilian losses are an unavoidable consequence of Hamas's military tactics. Specifically, they accuse Hamas of embedding fighters and infrastructure within densely populated civilian areas, using civilians as human shields.
Okay.
So they argue that Hamas bears responsibility for placing civilians in harm's way. And regarding the term genocide itself,
yes,
Israel has strongly rejected the allegations, often calling them baseless, outrageous hyperbole. In some instances, officials have equated the accusation of genocide against Israel with forms of anti-Semitism or even Holocaust denial, arguing it's an attempt to delegitimize the state's right to self-defense.
That's a very forceful rejection. Now, you mentioned the human shields argument. From the sources, do legal frameworks offer any specific guidance on how courts weigh that claim, especially against allegations of such widespread civilian harm in urban warfare? It seems incredibly difficult.
It is. It's one of the most challenging aspects of applying international humanitarian law or the laws of war in modern conflicts. Well, the core principle is proportionality. Even if there is a legitimate military target, an attack is prohibited if the expected civilian harm the loss of life or injury to civilians, damage to civilian objects would be excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated.
Excessive harm.
Right. Now, the alleged use of human shields by a group like Hamas definitely complicates that calculation. It undeniably increases the risk to civilians near legitimate targets.
But does it give the attacking force a blank check?
No, absolutely not. International law is very clear on this. The presence or alleged presence of human shields does not absolve the attacking force of its fundamental obligations.
Which are?
The obligation to distinguish between combatants and civilians at all times, and the obligation to take all feasible precautions to avoid or minimize incidental harm to civilians.
All feasible precautions. What does that mean in practice?
It means things like choosing weapons carefully, giving effective warnings where possible, verifying targets. Courts would look forensically at specific incidents. Did the attacking force know or have reason to believe civilians were present? Did they assess the potential harm? Did they take every possible step to mitigate that harm, even knowing the enemy was operating within a civilian area?
Yeah.
It's a very high bar, and it involves analyzing patterns of attack, not just isolated incidents.
Okay, that provides important context for the defense argument. So, considering these severe allegations, Israel's defense, the legal complexities, how has the wider international community actually responded? What actions are being taken?
The response has been varied, reflecting, frankly, deep divisions globally. We already mentioned the International Court of Justice.
The provisional measures, yes.
Right. Ordering Israel to protect Palestinians and ensure aid gets in, but importantly, not ordering a complete stop to military operations at that stage. That was a key point.
Okay.
Well, beyond the courts, there have been diplomatic moves. A significant one was a meeting of a 32-nation group, sometimes called the Hague Group, at a summit in Bogota.
Bogota, what did they decide?
They took a very strong stance. Their declaration explicitly called the actions in Gaza genocide. And they didn't just use the word. They proposed concrete measures.
Like what?
Things like sanctions against Israel, arms embargoes, stopping weapon sales, and pushing for legal accountability for individuals involved.
Oh, okay. 32 nations calling for sanctions and embargoes is significant.
It definitely signals a hardening stance among a substantial group of countries. Then there's another angle, corporate accountability.
Companies being involved.
Yes. A UN rapporteur actually identified specific companies alleged to be aiding Israel's war effort. The suggestion was that these companies could potentially be profiting from what the rapporteur termed an economy of genocide.
An economy of genocide. That's a very stark phrase.
It is. It raises questions about the role of international business in conflicts where such allegations arise. And finally, on a national level, we see moves like in the UK.
What is happening there?
Legislators there are actively pushing for new laws that would mandate genocide prevention as a core part of UK foreign policy. They're specifically citing the situation in Gaza as a critical test case, arguing that governments have a duty to act when there's a plausible risk of genocide occurring.
So ICJ warnings, calls for sanctions, corporate scrutiny, national policy debates. It's happening on multiple fronts.
Absolutely. The pressure is building from various directions.
So the ultimate question: is this genocide? We've unpacked the definitions, we've looked at the evidence presented by sources, we've considered Israel's defense. Let's try and synthesize where things stand right now in this incredibly complex picture.
Okay. Based on the sources, what we see is a clear and stark divide in interpretation.
Right.
On one side, you have reputable legal bodies, numerous human rights organizations, and certain states arguing that Israel's actions taken together, the mass killing, the engineered starvation through blockade, the destruction, the rhetoric, do legally fit the definition in the Genocide Convention. They argue that the pattern of conduct and the statements provide sufficient evidence of the necessary intent.
But that's not the only view.
Not at all. On the other side, you have Israel's strong rebuttal, supported by some other states and commentators, arguing vehemently that the crucial element, the specific intent to destroy Palestinians as a group, is simply not there.
They frame it as tragic consequences, not deliberate policy.
Exactly. Tragic but unintended consequences of a legitimate war of self-defense against Hamas, complicated by Hamas's tactics. From this perspective, the high threshold for proving genocidal intent hasn't been met.
And where does the ICJ stand now?
The ICJ, remember, has issued that warning, the provisional measures telling Israel to prevent genocidal acts. That indicates the court believes there's at least a plausible risk.
Plausible risk,
Yeah.
okay.
But a final binding judgment on whether genocide has occurred, that's still pending. Those proceedings take a long time.
So no definitive legal answer yet from the top court.
Not yet. But what's undeniable is that public and political outrage is growing globally. The humanitarian situation is dire, and the world is watching very closely to see if and how legal and moral accountability will eventually manifest.
This GeoDecode has really highlighted how crucial clear legal definitions and criteria are, especially when stakes are this high. We've seen how evidence from IGOs, NGOs, courts is pointing strongly towards these genocide allegations. And we've also made sure to understand Israel's firm rejection of that label based on military necessity and their accusations about Hamas's tactics.
And I think ultimately what this deep dive shows us is that profound tension in international law. You have the devastating impact of the conflict, which is undeniable.
Yeah, the human cost.
The sheer human cost. But then you have the incredibly high legal bar of proving the specific intent required for genocide. It's not just about the outcome. It's about the proven state of mind.
A gap between the suffering and the legal proof.
In many ways, yes. And while the humanitarian crisis deepens, the world is grappling with this legal and moral chasm. The final verdict, legally speaking, awaits decisions from the ICJ, maybe potential ICC prosecutions down the line. But the question of accountability hangs heavy right now. What stands out to you from all this information?
This is where analysis ends and informed consideration begins. Subscribe and let's stay